Oh, what's up, man?
What is up? What is up? What is up? How you doing today, my friend?
Doing good, man. I'm just excited to talk about this because it's been hard for me to hold back these last couple days. Oh, I'm doing good.
Good, good. We are going to be talking about a lot today. And for everyone tuning in, welcome, my friends, to the Pixelists podcast, where we talk about all amazing things, shows, video games, movies. Lately, we've been talking about Loki, which has brought you here. In fact, we're talking about the Loki season finale, Shed a Tear. I'm your host, Blake, and across from me is the beautiful man with the great beard, Will. What up, dude?
That's me. Whew.
And yeah, we're gonna try to untangle the spaghetti mess of just plot bomb that happened in last night's episode. Also gonna say, we told you. It feels like that's a running theme. And yeah, first things first. What'd you think of the episode?
I really liked it. I saw that there were some and I might be too in tune with like Twitter because the bad gets amplified, I feel like, but I loved it. I did see a lot of criticism of it, but me personally really liked it. Loved what they did with it. Loved how they massively set up like everything going forward. Loved Jonathan Majors. I felt like he stole the show with the scenes he was in, and yeah, I thought it was a great finale to a great show. What about you?
Good. Well, I haven't read any criticism, but unfortunately, I didn't love it. I liked it, but I wasn't crazy about it. I think whelm's a fair word. We turned it off and I was like, okay, interesting. So I feel like I'll probably like it more the more maybe we talk about it and the more I digest it.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't quite what I was maybe wanting or expecting.
Interesting.
And I'll share more of that when we get into the actual discussion.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, so I'll keep this brief. But that's kind of when I was speaking on like the negative stuff I saw. It was kind of that. We'll dive into it, but yeah, I liked it, and I will say that I've had a little bit more time for it to marinate, and I've grown more fonder of it the more I've sat with it. So maybe that'll happen for you as well.
Yeah. It's like 1 week later, I hate it.
Dang.
And I hate you. It's like, wait, what? Well, let's do a little bit of a recap. And I feel a bit unfair that I have to be the one to untangle I joked about it being an exposition, like knowledge bomb of like what's happening. But let's do a quick recap of the episode. And Will, since you've seen it a day in advance of me, you're welcome to jump in and help me with this too. But the episode basically opens up with, we have the same Marvel little kind of flip book intro that we've always seen. However, which I love this for flavor, you have all these voice, what's the word for it? Voice cameos. Yeah, like you're hearing the actual spoken quotes from previous Marvel movies that are getting overlaid and stacked on top of one another. And it gives kind of like this interesting, like, I won't say like a timeline effect. It's almost like it just kind of helps create this sense of like you're seeing everything that's happened since the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. How I took it.
I agree.
Well, so that peels out from there into a basically we see what appears to be a black hole. It kind of just came out of it, and it's kind of implied that that's where the universe that we just came out of sort of was. And we dive into another one, and it's really sort of cementing this multiverse. We'll hear later on the person of interest of this episode actually describes it as universes stacked on top of one another. And basically the camera drives into this other black hole, into this other universe, and it centers all the way in onto presumably the sacred timeline, which is this cosmic, almost Milky Way-esque type of thread that's in space. And in the center of it is this asteroid that has the mansion on it that we saw from the previous episode. And the camera finally comes in onto Sylvie and Loki. definitely seeming to be out of their depth, but here they are at the end of time at this location. They walk up to the mansion doors. They're ready to enter when Sylvie says, like, hey, I need a minute. Like, this is finally the revenge that I've been wanting to get my whole life. And then the door just opens and sort of welcomes them in. They walk in, and then we have this, like, oh gosh, man, this freaking
jump scare, man.
Yeah, Miss Minutes face is just like, hey y'all, and it's just terrifying.
Oh, no.
Definitely don't have your volume super high like we did when this happened. But Miss Minutes is there, and it's implied that she's actually sort of like the assistant to the person who's in charge, who she calls He Who Remains. And so she's here almost as an in-between for He Who Remains, and says, hey, I want to offer you a deal. We can send you back into your timelines. You can have basically what you've always wanted. Loki, the Battle of New York. How about a battle that you actually won? How about you actually kill Thanos? And he's visibly intrigued by this. And then to Sylvie, says something along the lines of, doesn't say we could bring you your family back, but says we can give you the life of happiness that you've always wanted, type of deal. They both look at each other and agree this is not what we want. This wouldn't be real. Miss Minutes vanishes, poofs, and we see her reappear back at the TVA in Renslayer's office, who she's going through different files. Miss Minutes shows up and says, here's what you need. It's on the TIMPad that's being downloaded. And she looks at it and says, this isn't what I asked for. And she says, it's what he wanted to send you, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Speaking for He Who Remains. I don't remember if it's at this point, but maybe I'll just go ahead and add this part in just for the simplicity of the recap. We do have Mobius eventually does come in and basically says, hey, this, I'm back. And Rensselaer's not too surprised, kind of says, if, of anyone I expected to not, everyone, of all the people I expected to be able to make it back, definitely you were the one that I thought would make it. And she has this great line where she says, are you planning to prune me or kill me? And he's like, yeah, I really like that plan. But so he decides he's going to basically, he pulls out the baton, and she says, this isn't going to work. What are you going to do? And he says, well, actually, I don't think the TVA is really as stable as you think it is anymore. And we see this other scene of B-15 being chased through a high school. And Mobius, by the way, has held up this pin that is all too familiar, that we've talked about on the Pixelists podcast. And it's presumably this high school that's on the pin. B-15 is being chased by this new lieutenant that we saw who had pruned Mobius. And they arrive in Renslayer's office, where Renslayer comes out and says, what are you guys doing here? What's going on here? And he's like, Judge Renslayer, what are you doing here? It's a little bit corny, but it's like, kind of what you'd expect.
Yeah.
And B-15's like, we have a lot to talk about. And it's implied that this whole truth of everyone being variants ultimately gets revealed. Mobius attacks Renslayer. She easily, buffers his advance and knocks him to the ground. And he's like, well, that didn't work. And then he's like, where are you going to go? And she says, I'm going to go find free will. And she walks through a TIMPad door and is gone. Back at the mansion at the end of time, Sylvie and Loki, they're walking through this mansion, and an elevator door opens up, and inside is He Who Remains. He's unnamed. He even kind of jokes that, like, Miss Minutes, yeah, she keeps calling me that, but I do kind of like it. He invites them up into the elevator. He's very coy, doesn't seem very threatening at all. And they come inside. Sylvia immediately tries to slice at him, and he does kind of like the similar tech we've seen in previous episodes, where like someone gets dialed back and moved. He does that for himself and moves out of the way and reappears behind her, and it's kind of like, okay, yeah, try again.
Yeah.
And we see him do this a couple of times, by the way, where it's obvious that it's not so simple to just simply kill him. They get up into his office, I guess, so to speak. And essentially what happens is we as the viewers get this massive dump of plot. And ultimately it's an introduction to the next big setting for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where he explains there are these universes that are stacked on top. He admits that the TVA is not run by the Timekeepers, but it's run by him. And although he doesn't directly call himself this, we know that this is now Kang the Conqueror. And in fact, people ask, he's asked, by Sylvie and Loki, like, what is your name? And he says, I've been called a conqueror. I've been called, he says a couple other things. He says a jerk. And even though he doesn't call himself by name, this is presumably him. And he reveals that in the 31st century, he discovered that there were alternate universes. And at the same time, in all these other locations, other Kangs were discovering that there were alternate universes. They developed the technology to travel between one another's universe. And ultimately, there's what Kang describes as peace, narcissistic, self-congratulatory peace. And I kind of envision like this, hey, you look good. Nice job. It's like, hey, you too, man.
Yeah.
Well, naturally, ego gets the best of them. And this war that was referred to by Miss Minutes in the early propaganda video of this multiversal war, we now realize was actually these Kangs that were fighting against one another.
Right.
He mentions that a creature is born out of this massive war, which we know as to be Alioth, and that he weaponized Alioth to basically end the war, and presumably consumed all the other Kangs. And it's in this moment that he tells them, hey, you have a decision to make. You can either run the TVA on my behalf and go back to, you get your power, you get your authority, but you'll basically work in the TVA for me. Or you can kill me, but if you kill me, you're going to cause the sacred timeline to basically split or branch, and you're going to create basically a power vacuum for all these other Kangs who I've been actively pruning to basically unabatedly create another war, create another big power grab. It's in this moment that he reveals this bracelet that he's been using to sort of time jump and avoid Sylvie's attacks. He also says, I've seen all of this. I know everything's going to happen. Like, I know that you're going to attack me here and things like that. And Sylvie moves forward where Loki steps in front of her and basically says, whoa, we can't kill the guy. I think he's telling the truth. And then we have this moment of tension between the two of them where they actually fight a bit. And Sylvie really wants revenge. She really wants to kill this person who's responsible for her life being ruined. And Loki really feels like the fate of the universe is in the balance of this person staying alive. We have a great kiss between the two of them. And he basically pleads and begs for her not to do this. And it seems like she might finally relent. And then she says, I'm not you. And we realize she's grabbed this wristband. She's opened up a door and she sends Loki through back into, we see the TVA. And then she turns and stabs and kills Kang, but not before he says, see you soon. And it's interesting. It's a great scene. And behind his dead body, she can actually see the timeline beginning to branch and split. Back in the TVA, Loki is wanting to try to do damage control. He's running through the TVA. It's interesting that none of the agents seem to be, stopping, being like, hey, you're that variant.
Yeah.
They really let him just run through. And then he finally sees Mobius and B-15 in the archives in this library that we saw in a previous episode. And he runs up and says, hey, we found the person at the end. We made a huge mistake. Like, we have to do something here. And Mobius is like, whoa. Hey, who are you? Like, you're an analyst. So what division are you in? And like, tell me what's going on. And they're kind of calling for backup. Like, there's this crazy guy here. And right then, Loki looks, and the statue of the timekeepers that were so, that kind of imagery was so used in every episode has now been replaced with an image of a statue, of Kang. And that is where the finale ends.
Woo. What a cliffhanger.
What a cliffhanger, for sure. A lot happened. A lot happened.
Yeah, I mean, the majority was basically just like a massive info dump, but and I think that's why some people were pretty like whelmed or underwhelmed with it, but I liked it. I think it is necessary in a way. So
Sure.
maybe they could
Yeah.
have had another episode after this, and but I don't know.
I think the thing that, and I haven't had too much time to think about it, what bothered me about the episode was it didn't quite feel like a Loki episode compared
Hmm.
to what every other episode has been. This felt like more of a setup for the next phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which we've heard that Kang is essentially going to be the next Thanos. We know he's already confirmed in the next Ant-Man film. So it's all very exciting in that perspective of like, and I even texted you when the elevator doors opened and it was Jonathan
Yeah.
Majors. I texted you, I was like, oh my gosh, Kang, like this is
Yeah, I
insane.
think it was in all caps too.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I mean, even though we talked about it.
Yeah.
Um, I think in terms of like a setup for like what's coming, it's very cool and it's awesome. And it's like, okay, this is the start of the multiverse. In terms of the end of the Loki season, I found myself I felt like a bit was unresolved and it felt like it didn't have the same flavor of other episodes. But the way I was talking about this with my wife was, you know, I'm coming from WandaVision, I'm coming from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which those are limited run series.
Mhm.
There's only one season of it. So WandaVision, the finale is this really beautiful end of the story. And the way I compared it to her was I was saying, in Mandalorian, we didn't really get that in the season one because it's seasonal content. And what always happens at the end of a season, there's the cliffhanger with a
Right.
lot of questions that leads you into wondering what's going to happen in the next season.
Yeah.
And with like Mandalorian, for example, we didn't really get that nice, like deep breath. Oh, wow, that was a great story ending until the end of season 2, which I won't spoil for people who haven't seen Mandalorian. I
Great
felt
show.
like it is a great show. I felt like the resolution I was looking for happened at the end of that second season. All this to say, for me and Loki, that's kind of where my headspace is right now of like, okay, I feel a bit unsettled. I feel like there's some things that are not resolved that I wanted to see resolved, but I'm assuming we're going to see that at the end of season 2.
Yeah, I think those are all completely fair criticisms, and I understand that a lot of people felt that same way that I saw. Well, I can't fault you for that. That's I
You're
get
like,
that.
you're out.
I get that.
We're not
I
always, sorry, we're not always going to agree, which is
oh yeah.
fine. But anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're fine. I was just repeating myself. I was just say, yeah, I liked it because I really just and we talked about this in our last episode when we were kind of speculating who we thought it was, and um, I was excited for the possibility of Kang, but I didn't think it would be him, mostly because being wrong about Mephisto and the other one, I was like, let's just I'm gonna temper my expectations, and
We had been hurt before.
yeah, exactly. So I was like, I'm just gonna assume it's a Loki, but I'll be really excited if it's Kang. So when it was, I just was so excited that they actually did that. And like you mentioned, like this is just a massively impactful moment for
Mhm.
not just Loki, but literally everything going forward. I mean, literally everything. Like the multiverse is now open, which we're going to talk about that. But and I
How
just
about
loved it. And
how,
go ahead.
how about just the courage of Kevin Feige and the rest of the team to, because one of the things we had said we were about seven, or maybe I said I was 70-30 on it being Loki and Kang.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest caveat for it not being Kang was we said they're not going to introduce this major villain on a Disney Plus show, for a show that so many casual people are watching who like they don't know the comic history, they don't know a
Right.
lot of this stuff. It's not going to happen. It's like the courage and like the trust in the franchise to be like, actually, no, we are going to do that. We are
Yeah.
going to introduce this character and we are going to introduce the multiverse. It's not going to happen in Spider-Man, or which we knew was the next big film coming out before Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. It was a really cool moment for sure.
Yeah. And so that just kind of that made me like it just from the jump. But then I also just loved the choices they made with it. Being that one, just the way Jonathan Majors played the character, like I was expecting an ominous, like evil,
Yeah.
Kang the Conqueror,
Yeah.
and really that's not what we got. We really got
Right.
Immortus, who is another
Right.
version of Kang, who is like the benevolent benefactor. And so I just loved that, like, okay, and this all makes sense because since if it was gonna be a Loki, we kind of had ideas for like what made that make sense. So the fact that it was a Kang, I love that it kind of ties it up neatly in the sense that, like, oh, this was a good Kang, and he's the reason that other versions of himself haven't taken over here. And so I just loved that, like, that was a really, what's the word, really satisfying explanation for me for
Mhm.
like why the Marvel universe has existed in its current state for this long. And again, I just
I
loved that he was like so playful and like,
Right.
I don't know if that's the right word, but
It was a good way to portray a person who basically was at the end of time, totally isolated, and probably exhausted from running the TVA and like constant pruning, but also a bit insane. Was kind of how I took it.
yeah.
Um, but I will say, I don't know if we'd call him a good Kang. Definitely. What's the phrasing he uses? He says something like, "The other versions of me are a lot more." Um, Basically meaner. Like they're a
Right.
lot rougher than I am.
Mhm.
But there's a couple things he says. He says something along the lines of, um, like for every villain, like they're the hero in their story or something like that,
Mhm.
which I thought was an incredibly self-aware moment for himself. Not that he was necessarily ever the villain, but I think what I took that to mean was it implied that he knows he's made choices that weren't. I mean, it's basically the premise of the TVA. I mean, he's pruning entire existences of people,
Yeah.
and it's essentially for the greater good.
Right.
It's making those hard choices, and so um, benevolence probably a fair word, and probably maybe as decent a version of Kang that maybe we're going to see.
Yeah, like good on the Kang spectrum. Probably should put it that way.
Which we might
But
have to create one of these by the time we're done with the MCU. The next phase is let's pull out our Kang spectrum here.
yes, because and also what I'm excited for is that we could potentially see not only like the Kang that's gonna be the Thanos level big bad, but we could potentially see lots of Kangs now, right? Because there's probably going to be a lot that are fighting to be the supreme one. They're Highlander, or there can only be one. So
Yeah.
I would love to see Jonathan Majors get to play like several versions of that character. I think that would be interesting.
I am apprehensive isn't the right word because it's not like there's a lack of trust there. It's just like an appreciation for the weight of that role. Because like you said, if he's going to play different versions, I mean, are we going to see like wildly different like personalities? Are we going to see, I mean, the Lokis we've seen, many of them have been very different.
Mm-hmm.
But like the core personality traits have been there, I guess. So for Jonathan Majors, I'm thinking, yeah, he might have his work cut out for him. I'm interested. I'm interested in how Marvel crafts the whole story because, again, I'm thinking about for the casual viewer, it felt like Endgame was like a big step towards sci-fi is not necessarily the right word, but like time travel is just confusing,
Mm-hmm.
and so making a decision like that and being comfortable with their audience who are from all levels of engagement,
Right.
being comfortable with them understanding the time heist and like here's what this means and here's how this makes sense and like how do we bring them along in this without them being like, wait, what's happening?
Right.
It feels like that feels so basic compared to what we're now
Mm-hmm.
engaging into. And so I'm curious as to how they're going to write the story so that it's compelling, it's enjoyable, and it's not overly complicated and messy. Like I'm kind of getting some like, especially when I think about like all the different Kangs, I'm getting like an Agent Smith vibes of like the Matrix 2, where like there's like hundreds like rushing out, and you're kind of like, okay, this is interesting. But I don't
Yeah.
think we're gonna get that, but that's kind of what I think about.
Yeah, I mean that's fair, and I love the trust in the audience that they are willing to do these complicated things. And there's definitely going to be the casual viewer who like has only seen two Marvel properties, but they go see the new one when it comes out, and a lot of stuff's going to go over their head, right? But I think you know a lot of people are I don't want to. They're not diehard fans. It's too of extreme of a title, but I don't, like a lot of people. I try to give them the credit because I think they do know what's going on. And for the really like in the weeds minutia stuff, that's why we're here, baby. You come check out our videos, we'll explain it to you. So I'm on board and I can't wait. I hope they get even crazier, which I don't even know if that's possible. We have basically already have the craziest multiverse shenanigans already happening, but
Well, so let's maybe let's talk more about this Kang. He's at the end of time. He's running the TVA. Let's get into the weeds as best we can on the decision that is put in front of Sylvie and Loki.
okay.
We mentioned this in the recap. They're being asked basically, hey, you can either kill me or you can run the TVA and we can keep, the sacred timeline protected. And we know what happens. I want to ask you, what are the implications of Sylvie killing Kang? Because we know that this action sort of unleashes the ability for all other variant Kangs to rise to power. But I had a tough time really digesting, okay, he's dead, and now the timeline's already splitting. Like it's already branching off. He even has a moment earlier where he says, like, we just crossed the threshold, which I want to ask you about that specifically here in a little bit. But help me understand, why does his death create such an immediate cascading effect on the sacred timeline?
Okay, and I'm going to take one step back to kind of lay some groundwork here. I know we've been talking about him the whole time, but so Kang, aka I think the version we saw is Immortus, which we talked about is like the benevolent one. AKA is Nathaniel Richards. That's who like the character is. Kang is Kang and Immortus, and he has a million names because there's lots of versions of him, right? But Nathaniel Richards is who he is, and he is a descendant of Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four. Which not that he's like a descendant, so it's not like his son or grandson or anything far down the line, but still super cool that like in a way this is our first solid Fantastic Four connection in the MCU. So little shout out there. But so you spoke about this in the recap, but so Nathaniel Richards is from the 31st century, and he's like a brilliant scientist, and he's the one that discovers that there's the universe stacked on each other, basically discovers the multiverse, as it were. And since he discovered that, infinite however many variations of him, some of them were also discovering that at the same time, and they connect. And you said it was like self-congratulatory, and they collaborate for a time, but then some of them are not so good and are like, my reality is going to be the main reality, and I'm going to start making sure that we're on top. And they start having the multiversal war that was referenced. And in that little scene we get where he's describing that, and there's the like the polymer clay that's like making different models as he's speaking, we can see that when they're collaborating is when they make the time pads and the doors, and we even see them at a table making the reset charges. So Kang himself is the one responsible for all of that. And so then the war happens, right? And then you mentioned something that I didn't catch during the recap, that I didn't catch when I was watching the episode. But so he said he used Eliath, and that's what helped him like win everything else. Okay, so so our Kang, is able to isolate this timeline, and in so doing, is branching. Now that he's in control, he can branch and make sure that the universe basically never splits. It's just the singular sacred timeline. So that's been his whole thing the whole time, right? So sorry for all that backlog, but so now to your question about like why is his death impactful? It's because the TVA, his entire mission has been to basically prevent the multiverse. And that moment where he says we just passed the threshold, that is like he has controlled everything for all time, always, up until that point right there. And he yielded control. I think like I think if he wanted, he could have kept this going, but for some reason, he decided to inject a little chance into his life. Maybe he's so ancient he doesn't care anymore. He's ready to move on. But so he reaches that point where, I no longer know what's going on, and it's going to depend on what these two Lokis do. Um, and as we know, Sylvie kills him, and which is basically like, not only does she just, I don't think just the mere act of killing him necessarily is what's going to cause the chaos, but the act of rebuking the offer to continue the TVA. So yes, he's dead, but also she's not going to rule the TVA like he wanted. So now the TVA is not doing what it needs to be doing in order to keep it one timeline. So basically, as soon as that threshold moment is met, and he's no longer controlling things, that's when the branches start, even though he hasn't died yet. But then when he gets killed and, no one is running the TVA in that same way anymore, that means the branches are not getting pruned and the multiverse has officially begun. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, there's so much to like unpack in such there's so much dialogue that like brings so many like questions to answer and like so many details to unpack. And you mentioned this a second ago. I wanted to ask you about this too. Is do you think that, and we'll just call him Immortus for just simplicity's sake. Yeah, right. Do you think he had reached the point of indifference towards protecting the sacred timeline, or protecting, I guess, all of time from himself? Because he's even asked, like, why would you do this? And he says, I'm old. I can't keep doing this anymore. And it's tough because you don't know exactly what he's being honest about and like what he's withholding in terms of information. But basically says, I'm old. And he also tells them, hey, I brought you here. Like you didn't come find me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I saw you on Lamentus. I saw you, like, I literally brought you to my doorstep. And he actually says, I created the path and you basically just walked it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, why, if so much is on the line of the presence of Sylvie and Loki coming to his door, why even do that? That's something that I'm pretty curious about.
Wait, what do you mean? Why? Like, why do anything that he did?
Yeah.
I think it is what you said. And real quick, pat us on the back because we kind of called that. And we were talking about if it was Loki that was behind everything, but we did say that like maybe that the person behind the corner had been pulling all the strings to make this happen, and it really like nothing had been like everything that happened was because the person behind it wanted to happen. Like he wanted them to show up at the castle. Anyway, just a quick shout out to us. And then I think it is what you said, that basically indifference. I mean, I don't think he gives a time frame. Maybe he does. Does he ever say like thousands or millions of years or anything?
He just, in terms of how old he is,
like how long he's been doing this. Yeah,
I don't think so. He does say, I'm old. I'm older than I look. And he says something like, I've been doing this a long time. I think we can presume it has been like eons.
Yeah, because, and I mean, let me table this. Remind me, I want to talk about the intro some more after this, but I want to keep going on our current train of thoughts.
Yeah.
But I mean, we saw universes birth and die in that intro, so presumably he's been doing it that long.
And Renslayer even says to Mobius, says something like, we've been doing this for eons.
Yeah, that's
like
true.
You and I. And so yeah, I mean, they've been doing it as long as the TVA has been around. So quite a long time.
So yeah, I mean, my best guess, and maybe it's something that we get, I mean, he's dead, so maybe we don't get any answers, but my best guess is that, yeah, like he's done this for eons and maybe he's just bored, like ready to die. He's probably done, he's lived many lifetimes, probably done everything he ever wanted to do, and maybe he just got tired of it and was, death is the only out for him. But I guess, he didn't necessarily want to die. The one question I had was, if they had chosen his offer and taken over, what was he gonna do?
Vacation. I don't know.
So
I don't know.
But yeah,
sunglasses. See you guys.
My best guess is just got tired of it. Was ready.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the history of Immortus, but I presume that in some ways, like being given death is, in his mind, like, I'm okay with this if this happens.
Mm-hmm. He did seem at peace with it. He wasn't ever scared. Just, he even had that great stinger of "see you soon," which I love that.
With a wink.
Yeah.
Well, if we could get like really into the weeds, I want to throw out some things I've been thinking about, and you can tell me how crazy they seem. Because I was
Yeah.
trying to like make sense of all this that was happening, and I mentioned the question of like, okay, why does his death seem to precipitate an instant effect of now the timeline is splitting? And something I was thinking about is that moment a few minutes earlier where he's being very charismatic almost, and eventually says, he pauses and like kind of looks around and he says, "Oh my gosh, we just passed the threshold." And I was presuming they were trying to imply this is like the threshold of like he's never seen past this moment.
Yeah, that's what I got.
I'm guessing he's been like time traveling, even like seeing Loki and Sylvie arrive, and so that's how he knows like how to avoid like different attacks from her and things like that. Was that what you got from that, or?
I was wondering that too. I definitely got that that moment was like the furthest he didn't know anything past that, right?
Mhm.
But what I was trying to piece together is how did he know the other stuff? Like obviously he controls time. He could, and so was it just him living that moment and rewinding it, or is there someone yet above him that like, he even brings out those
Huh.
scripts and is like, I know what you're going to say. It's right here. Like who gave him those, or is that just an
Oh,
implication
right.
of he lived it before and so he wrote it down? I'm not sure what the answer is there.
I'm assuming since it happens in like the end of time is still within time, it's like Loki seeing his file. I mean, he can see it all the way through, even past the events that he hasn't experienced yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming something similar where he can see, oh yeah, Sylvie stabs me here. So something like that. I'm not sure. The thing that is interesting to me is I wonder if he was trying to create his own Nexus event. And in the sense of, it almost feels like he's stalling. It almost feels like he's trying to find the right words that I guess keeps this conversation going longer than maybe he's seen it happen before, until finally he has this moment where he's thrown off a little bit and says, "Oh my gosh, like we're past the threshold." Threshold, and maybe this is like Mephistoing hard, but it's similar terminology to what we got in episode 2, where Loki's getting the crash course and they're talking about when a timeline begins to branch, you have a threshold
Mm-hmm.
where it can still be pruned, but after that point, it's unchangeable. And he even says something like, I've never seen past this point. I don't know what it is. So I wonder if like him not having been killed yet and like getting to this point was like now this Nexus event happening. And as it starts to sort of like take on a life of its own, him getting stabbed is the branches having reached that threshold point of no return, and they began to immediately peel off from. I don't know. It's made a lot more sense in my head, but the reason I bring this up is because it's confusing why he would both want to bring them there and yet also seemingly wants to stall them as long as possible. Like Miss Minutes, for example, being like, "Hey, I have a deal for you."
Mm-hmm.
Like if the point is to bring them to his door and to bring them to his office, why give them an offer to leave? You see my point? Like I'm trying to like make sense of like these two contradicting
Right.
reasonings. What's your take on it?
Well, I had the same thought about the Miss Minutes thing. That confused me. But if we pause on that for 1 second, other than that, I didn't get the impression he was stalling. Like in when he was
Okay.
talking in the room, I thought he was just like getting the information he needed to get out, and then, uh, and I think one thing, a little detail I loved is like when they're doing the threshold. When he says it's the threshold, I think he drops like the pin or something he's holding, and he's just like fascinated that it falls. So to me, that was like this is the first event that he hasn't known the outcome of in like
Hmm.
eons. And so I
Yeah.
thought
Wow.
I love that he was like sitting in that moment. And so yeah, I mean, this goes back to like why he's doing any of this, but I think, whatever the reason is, he was tired of being the one in control and wanted to maybe it was exciting for him to like not know for once, and he just like finally built up to this moment where he's like, I'm going to actually just see what happens and not be in
Mhm.
control. Um but so I didn't get the impression he was stalling there, but back to the Miss Minutes thing, I was trying to reconcile that, and like, yeah, like if the whole point was to bring them there and make them this offer, why was she giving them that like temptation then? Unless, like, I don't know, even if, unless that was just her way of offering what he was about to offer, like, she's saying you can be king or whatever, like, because he could do that if he's the one in control of the TVA. But even if that's the case, why like why offer that right before you're going to get all this information anyway? So like something was weird there to me. And also, so not to say too many, like go too many directions right here, but what information did he give to Renslayer, and what is she doing?
Right.
If everything he was saying was true, what's with the Miss Minutes thing and what's with the Renslayer thing? Those seem to kind of contradict what he was saying in a way. I don't know what to make of it.
I don't know, and I think that's what fed into what took away from my enjoyment of the episode was walking away feeling like, okay, there's not a clear answer here. And I'm sure we'll get those answers as we get into like future films and like Loki season 2. But there's definitely, and I've been reading Reddit. I haven't seen really anyone who's been able to tackle this and kind of, like you said, reconcile these seemingly these lines of thinking that seem to oppose one another. With Renslayer, I presume he's given her some kind of information to go find him, because she talks when she's arguing with Mobius. He says something like, "What about free will?" And it's like, it's not about free will. It's like what we're doing here is more important than that. And she says basically only one person has free will, like the person in charge. Mm-hmm. And then she later on, as she's walking through the door, in the second scene in the office, he says, "Where are you going to go?" And she says, "I'm going to go find free will," which I took that to mean, that's the person in charge. He's the only one who has free will.
Yeah.
So I presume she's going to go find him with whatever information he's passed along. And we know in the comics that they do have a romantic relationship. And so it seems like they would inevitably find each other.
Yeah. So it's just, I agree that that's probably what she's doing. Like where she went is to meet up with a version of him. But what's interesting is that took place before, he died.
Right. Loki. Yeah.
So, and Immortus didn't know the outcome of what was going to happen in that room. So whatever he sent to her, he decided should happen regardless of this like monumental decision. So that's the part that like makes me curious. Like maybe it was just a contingency. Like, okay, if I'm going to do this later, if they do kill me, I'm going to set up this contingency. Or, maybe it had nothing. I don't know. I really don't know, but I want to know.
Well, he does say when he does, surely this guy knows. Sylvie's not going to say, okay, yeah, like we're good. It's probably, he probably had a pretty best guess that even though he was uncertain of the outcome, the odds of him dying were probably pretty high, which is why I like your idea of it maybe being some kind of contingency. Because he even tells Sylvie and Loki, hey, you could kill me and you can create all this war. And basically, I'm just going to find my way back to here anyway.
Right.
Back to this spot, which is a bit of a paradox in and of itself. But yeah, so maybe it's a contingency to ensure that his version of himself makes it back there. I don't know.
Yeah, and what you just said sparked something I wanted to mention is that this Immortus, and again, not that he's good, but he is who he is. But so I was wondering, like, do you think he maybe even was like the most ruthless of them all originally, and that's like he was like kind of Kang the Conqueror, like evil, and like that was just 85 millennia ago, and he's softened in that time and become more benevolent. I was wondering, like, was he always like the good Nathaniel Richards, or is he just the one that survived and softened with time?
The language is pretty interesting where he talks about Eliath. He says, I thought, when you go back, I need to watch it again because I had different interpretations of this with my wife in terms of, I thought at first go that he was saying he discovered Eliath and then weaponized it. But going back, I think the language is that another variant actually discovers Alioth, and he says, "I weaponized it,
Interesting.
and I used it." And so that to me does point to this more ruthless side of seeing an opportunity to wipe out the other Kangs. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something fair there, especially compared to his line later where he mentions every villain being the hero. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely he was a pretty tough character, but maybe just not the most evil one.
Mhm.
And I don't know if I buy the whole implication of I'm pruning timelines to protect everyone from myself. I like the thing that we've been talking about since episode 1 on our deep dive discussions has been how we suspected the TVA, whoever's in control of it, is ultimately being self-serving.
Right.
They're trying to ensure that if they're in power, that they remain in power. And so his whole bit about protecting everyone from the other Kangs, I don't really know about that. I more think that he has protected the sacred timeline because it ensures that he is literally the one who, even at the end of his power or at the end of his time, where he's like, I don't really care anymore. I assume he's still this person of immense ego who, even when it no longer matters, still wants to ensure that the story is this guy making it to the end. Even talking about it is kind of confusing, honestly.
Yeah.
So which feeds back into that contingency plan of maybe ensuring that Renslayer goes back to his original Nexus event moment that guarantees his arrival and or his formation, so to speak, and just making sure that he makes it. I don't know, because I don't
Yeah.
know if he really cares about. I don't know if he really cares about like the universal war in the sense of that would be really bad. People would die. I think he implies that would be really bad, but ultimately it's about making sure that I end up back on the throne of time, so to speak.
Yeah, I think he does care, but for that reason, that like he doesn't like he wants to be the king that wins, and so
Yeah.
if he's just got to prevent the war by making sure he's the only one. So yeah, I agree that it's self-serving. Um, and before we step away, there's one thing I forgot to mention that I just wanted to of the whole uh offer he makes to them is he's eating an apple, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it was very allegorical to me, like Satan in the Garden of Eden, and we got the
Yep.
two Lokis, kind of like Adam and Eve, and he
Yep.
makes them this offer of knowledge, and
Totally.
yeah, I don't know, I like that metaphor, as it were.
You remember that? Yes, I. Yeah, and credit to us. We talked about. I think you even said it. Like there was one more temptation coming, because the hero's journey just isn't complete without seeing Loki finally being offered what he's always wanted and being able to turn it down. And not only do they get it in that moment, but again earlier with Miss Minutes, he is offered what he always originally wanted. And he does turn it down, whether it was really that important a moment or not. For me, it really solidified the end of his journey. As far as we've seen it, obviously we have a season 2 coming, but the journey that started with episode 1, I thought that was a
Yeah.
really great moment to really kind of bookend, put a nice bow on who the Loki is that we're seeing now.
Agreed, and I actually liked the fact that they disagreed. That the two Lokis, like they both wanted to do something different, and you know, I believe our Loki was being honest with his way he was going there, because the whole conflict was that, she was accusing him of like, you just want to be in charge, like you just want the power. But, I don't know what your take on this was, but I didn't think it was that. I think he was generally concerned with, the implications of what Immortus was telling them, that like he
For sure.
believed him. I mean, he says as much, but that could have been a lie. But yeah, I believe that he actually was trying to like do the right thing, not just be the one in power.
Yeah, I totally agree. Absolutely. And I think us as the audience, I think we're a little, or I'll speak for myself. There's an opportunity to be frustrated of like, come on, Sylvie, like he's redeemed. Like, listen to this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And Loki sort of, I felt like it was a great line that helped us navigate this, where he says, you can't trust anyone. Because she says, why don't we see this the same way? And he says, because you don't trust anyone and I'm not trustworthy.
Yeah, I really like that moment.
Which was a great line.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And then I feel like we got to touch on it at least a little bit. The kiss. That's another thing that, and I'm on Twitter, bro. You know, there's Stan Twitter. There's a lot of things happen on Twitter. Let's put it that way. I know some people were furious about it, and to me, it didn't really matter to me.
I do not understand the controversy of this. Like, I do not get it at all. It is such a non-issue to me. I didn't even understand it. I don't mean to cut you off, by the way. I'm sorry.
No, you didn't. Yeah, I don't know. That's, and you know, sometimes the people with the loudest voices are the ones that, you know, are the least rational sometimes. So I was seeing a lot of that, and that's part of what I mentioned at the beginning of the episode when I saw a lot of people were upset with it.
What exactly are they? I haven't read any criticism on
I don't
this,
know.
by
I
the
didn't
way.
really go too deep into it, but I just know a lot of people like vehemently like hate that pairing. Like they think, you know, Loki romancing himself is weird, and they aren't for it.
I think so. Here's what I could see as a legitimate criticism, like someone being frustrated that the hero and the heroine are inevitably going to fall in love. Like someone saying, "Hey, I'm not really interested in that. Like, let's have, you know, this is like a totally, this is the weirdest example. Detective Benson and Detective Stabler from Law and Order SVU, who are partners.
Nice.
They're the ultimate partners. And I only bring this up because I saw a random episode of them together again after like 10 years of being off the show. And I was like, this is such a great moment. But there's no romantic interest there. And so I could see someone being like, oh man, I didn't want them to kiss because like I don't really want to see another romance between
just like a
the
forced,
actor and
like
yeah. So I could get that as a criticism. Now, I don't think it was forced. I think there was some really great moments. I think actually their chemistry on camera is really great. The whole self-love, whatever, that to me, like people getting so worked up over it, I'm like, you need to go outside, man. Like you've thought way too deeply into the show. It has meant you've taken too much of a meaning out of this to imply something weird. And you need to step away. I mean, like that's the only way I can think of it is I'm just like, this is such a non-issue and like not anything really that like mentally like, wait, so he's loving himself. Like, I just don't really think anything of that. And I, you know, obviously we don't talk to the writers of the show, but I'd be surprised if they also weren't like, really guys, like this is what you're upset over. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I think everything's been really well done, especially their romance. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with it. I because they'd been so kind of like not, they've kind of like they'd been flirty the last few episodes, but it also really hasn't crossed any lines. So I didn't know where they were gonna land with it. Like if it was gonna be like, you know, they just care about each other because they've been on this journey and they're both, you know, a Loki and blah blah, or if it was like an actual romantic thing. So, you know, and I think doesn't she even say right after she kisses him that like I'm not you? Isn't that when she says that?
Yes.
Which part of me was like, is this like, is she not a Loki? But I think that's Mephisto.
Yeah.
But
oh my gosh, we're here again.
and then she kicks him out the door, which I think we said that we thought one of them wouldn't make it, which they both made it presumably, but
yeah.
Wonder what she's doing now. And what? Sorry, one other thing. Going a lot of places right here. She grabbed the time pad, you know, that hit Immortus's to put him through that door. Do you think she knew where she was sending him?
That's something my wife mentioned was like, she was like, okay, how does she know how to use that?
Right.
I mean, it's got no like face to it. It's got no digital screen. There's no buttons on it, you know? And so, no, I think I think she genuinely thinks she sent him back to the TVA and didn't consciously. Because think about what they've always been told: the TVA exists outside of time. It's an authority that's been created by Kang. And I mean, who's to even think that there are other TVAs, right? So maybe
Yeah.
she, however this thing works, it's in a spur of the moment. TVA, yep, send him there,
TVA, yeah.
and just launches him back.
Okay, yeah.
So
I think the same. I think that, she, like she wasn't aware of what had already begun to happen,
right,
So this is a good time to talk about that. So what's going on with that TVA? I know a lot of people
no idea.
were
I'm so
speculating.
lost.
A lot of people were
I'm
speculating
way
that they
confused.
just had their memory wiped, and I'm definitely not on that team. Like it's a
No,
new version of the
has to
TVA.
be.
Yeah.
That is the one thing that I feel pretty strongly about too. Is like this conversation almost their memory wiped. Are things did somehow the events of this moment at the end of time
Warp.
rewrite history or
Yeah.
something? And the way I explained it, I was talking with my wife about it, was it's very Lost-esque in the sense of whatever happened happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so keeping in mind like the rules that have been established in the Marvel universe, where they go back in the time heist and they change some things. I mean, they're taking basically the stones to bring them back. And nothing ever in the future ever changed the things that happened in the past because those
Right.
things happened. And so I don't know if I'm not getting too in the weeds or if I should get more in the weeds, but all that to say, I don't think that this is the same TVA where now things for some reason have changed there. They've forgotten. I think it's like you said. I think we were lied to that there wasn't a TVA, but actually, just like there's multiple timelines, there are multiple, at least two TVAs.
Yeah, and I mean, we're all just throwing darts into the darkness right now on what's going on here, but one interpretation I had as well was that, at the point where she kicked him through the door, even though Kang wasn't dead yet, they'd already passed that threshold he spoke of. So, and just for sake of clarity here, basically the threshold is the point past which he's manipulating things. Like he relinquished control of the timeline and was just going to see what happened. So the branches had already started before he died. So to me, that
Right.
meant, we previously were operating under one sacred timeline, and there was a TVA for that sacred timeline. Now we might have 15 sacred timelines, so he could be at one of these 15 other TVAs that operate with those new timelines. But yeah, I agree that it's definitely not a memory wipe because, and you mentioned this in the recap, Loki freely just walks through the hall, whereas, this is those guards would, seemingly, do something to him if it was the same one he came from. And then, B-15 and Mobius are just in the library. Those are both like wanted people at the TVA at this point. And the thing that sets it over the top for me is the statue of Kang. Like if it's the same one, they did that pretty quick, unless it's like the reality altering time travel theory.
And I think the timing of it is what's really hard to like mentally wrap your head around because we have the threshold moment. We have the fight between Loki and Sylvie. Loki gets sent to some other TVA. Mentally, I'm having a tough time like piecing together the timing of it all. Like, did that moment of the threshold, like now is it like, an instant build, like where it like clicks a button and now all these other timelines are like created now? Where like now there's a full on TVA and there's a Mobius and there's like things that are happening. There's a statue of Kang.
Mm-hmm.
Or were those things already present outside of Kang's knowledge for some reason, but he just knew that they would, that particular TVA and that Kang would never interfere with him. I don't know. Like I'm having a really tough time piecing together, making it all make sense really in the sense of how did it happen so quickly where now he's in another TVA that has the Kang statue and etc.
Right. I'm leaning toward option one of those two things you just presented, as opposed to just like the innocuous Kang he allowed to exist. I think it's time is a weird soup, as our friend Fern says.
Yes.
But that castle on that rock, it's we don't really know the details of where exactly that is at the end of time, but like in the shots we see of it, like there's the asteroid with the castle, and like you can see the sacred timeline in the background. So it in a way it exists outside of it. So perhaps
Right.
that they're existing outside of like the time we're familiar with. So 2 seconds on this rock at the outside of time, perhaps whole new universes had already existed for billions of years just from that threshold moment. But then so when he gets thrown back, like yeah, there's this TVA that's a brand new TVA, but it has a whole universe that has
Mhm.
existed in a normal flow of time. But we're just being inserted into it at a similar time than the one we came from. Which I don't know if that's a stretch, but it kind of is what's helping make it make sense for me.
Yeah, and maybe if these other Kangs want war, they want this to happen. We have B-15 even say like, does he just really want us to let all these branch? To me, that is Kang she's referring to.
Right. Agreed.
And so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's I don't even know really what I'm saying, honestly, other than I think it's also interesting that um Mobius, which I totally missed this when I watched it, because when he says like, "Who are you?" Like, you're an analyst. I thought he was saying like, "Hey, remember your training? Like, what's happening next? Like, where are
Oh,
we?" And I was like, "What?"
yeah.
And then we rewound it because Marv was like, "No, he has no idea who he is," and I was like,
Yeah.
"Wait," what?" And so I rewound it. And I was like, "Oh, this makes way more sense
Yeah.
now," because I was like, "Mobius, this is like such a weird conversation you're having." But interesting that this is a timeline. We know Mobius has spent his career in the TVA pruning Lokis. Now we're in a time where there is no Loki, or I assume there's no Loki, or at least not a Loki that has been a big of a nuisance to be pruned.
Right.
But he doesn't even recognize this person. Like, who is this guy? I have no idea.
Right.
Which the implications of that is we know that Immortus, the story of Loki has always been you are meant to, cause death, cause pain, yada, yada, yada. And essentially it makes others better. And we see the Avengers.
Mm-hmm.
We're now in a universe where he may not even exist, which means that his purpose hasn't been laid out before him. So, what are the implications of that and the Avengers and their ability to be the heroes they're meant to be? I don't know.
That's a good point. I didn't think about it that way, that he just didn't recognize him, not because he didn't know him, but just because, oh, that's a Loki, at least. Yeah, it's interesting, which I guess, in Immortus's sacred timeline, Loki was a very frequent character because of, all the things you just said and yada yada yada. So if this is a whole new timeline that has branched because of the new universe, we don't have that Immortus in control of this one. So maybe Loki's not somebody that they mess with often because he doesn't play that same role. So that's really interesting. And
Well, think about it. If this is Doctor Strange mentions of all the times he sees, this sacred timeline is the only time that they win.
mhm.
So, are we looking at a TVA where the Avengers lost or Thanos won?
See, now we're getting into muddy territory because I don't think would Doctor Strange have seen things in other universes that didn't even exist yet, presumably.
No idea. I mean, he could see what hasn't happened yet
Yeah, I don't know. To me,
and what won't happen. I mean, I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know, dude. This is my point: is how are they going to write all this? Where like you and I will be like satisfied. We'll be like, okay, yeah, but like random viewer. I mean, I even have friends who they saw like 2 episodes of WandaVision. They're like, I don't get it. I was like, it's not for you.
well,
Okay.
if they saw the first two, that's fair because it's like we're like, what's happening here? You got to get to like
Yeah.
episode 3 or 4 for a
Sure.
casual person. But yeah, for sure. And
I don't know.
I wonder if well, just one more thing on that other world. Obviously Kang in this universe there's no facade of 3 timekeepers. There's just a statue of him. So clearly, like the whole MO of this TVA is vastly different. Like there's no I mean, there's probably still kind of like a mythology and propaganda, I would imagine, around him, but at the very least, there's, you know, everyone knows it's him. And like you said, B-15 even says he wants us to do this. So like, I forgot where I was going with this, but I guess it's just, clearly to me it's a different EVA, like different universe, and not a mind wipe. I guess to circle all the way
I
back
think
here.
I think presumably a more evil Kang who's fully narcissistic and ego driven. I mean, I don't know. That statue I think is very telling compared to the timekeepers statues and all the mythology around them. Because Kang, for all of our suspicions on how benevolent Immortus is,
Mm-hmm.
never built a statue for himself. In fact, his name is nowhere in any of the propaganda.
Although that
So I don't
middle
know.
timekeeper does kind of look like him.
It does, yeah.
But
Good point.
you saying statue just reminded me of something. Did you notice that in the castle at the end of time, when Loki and Sylvie are walking through it, there's four statues, three of
Yeah.
the timekeepers, and one's like a crumbled statue. So like, was there a fourth timekeeper, and like perhaps in an eon long past or something? Because like, if he created the timekeepers, like why?
Hmm.
Unless at one point they actually were a thing, and maybe he overthrew them or something. I don't know, but yeah, the fourth crumbled statue
Interesting.
gave me some questions.
I didn't see that. That's a great point. I did see in an earlier room when they're first walking in, before Miss Minutes like scares us to death, or maybe right after, there are two statues and they're hooded figures, which I was like, ooh, I wonder what that's supposed to be.
Okay, I didn't notice that. So yeah, I've actually only watched the episode once. I usually have watched it twice by the time we do this, so I definitely
Um,
need to watch it again as well. And
Well, a lot of questions. I don't know.
and I just had another thought. What if so Immortus sent information to Renslayer, which we don't know what it was, perhaps a contingency plan, and she goes through a time door and we don't see her again. Is perhaps the TVA that our Loki shows up at a alternate reality that whatever her actions were caused? Maybe she goes and warns this version of Kang, or whatever, and then this version of Kang builds this TVA that we're now in or something.
That's pretty interesting.
Like, it'd be interesting if like
Wow.
Renslayer was there and it was our Renslayer, and she like is running this TVA like below him.
Yeah. And maybe she's so pissed off at Loki, she went and pruned Odin or something, just to ensure like no Lokis. So,
I
which
like
by the
that
way,
theory.
why does Loki have a last name? And like,
So
what is Thor's last name? That's what I want to know.
the Thor's last name is Odin's son.
Oh yeah, I didn't
And
know that actually. Dang
so
it.
Loki's last name is Loki's son, or Laufey's son,
Loftus.
because his
Yeah,
son
yeah.
is actually the frost giant Laufey or LaFey or something.
Okay. All right. Well, that was easy. I don't know why I was thinking Thor doesn't have a last name. It doesn't make sense.
Any more
And then I,
brain busters?
and then I was like, oh wait, yeah, it is Odin's son. Dang
Okay.
it. You got me.
Um. So I guess one more thing on Renslayer while we're kind of there is the moment where we see them go to the high school, which also I think you were the one that first guessed that pencil might have meant she was like a teacher at the school.
Mm,
So one, nice call, and
thanks.
two, it uh, I don't know if you noticed, but in the background there's a diploma, but the name on it wasn't Ravonna Renslayer. It was Rebecca something. I couldn't really make out the last name, but it definitely wasn't Renslayer though.
Hmm.
And so that gave me questions. But I mean, maybe she just like assumed a new identity once she got to the TVA, and I don't know, but
I think she probably realized, because think about this, if they're all variants, they're inevitably going to, maybe not inevitably. If you're doing this work for eons, you might run into yourself at some point. And my wife and I, what we were talking about was, did she know she was a variant? And I think the answer is absolutely. And so I think at some point she figured it out, whether it was told directly by the timekeepers or something. But what I mentioned in that last episode or a couple episodes ago was the pin is too important a detail to have been brought up and not be brought up again. And we saw that in the finale today or
yeah.
yesterday. But I think she held on to it because, for all the selflessness that the TVA is presented to be operating out of, we know how ultimately selfish it is, and Renslayer's not separate from that. I think for all the missions they're doing, she kept one trinket most important to her, which is, her pin from her high school. And for me, it just speaks to the hypocrisy of the TVA, which we had talked about early on was, they're not as purist as they're coming out to be.
Yeah, agreed. And to me, I know we've been questioning a lot about what does she know and how much. I think the fact that, that pencil means, she's known for a decent amount of time at the very least. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, and I wonder if that was just a gambit by B-15 to like get those other Minutemen on her side, or if like they were gonna like actually do something with that Renslayer. Like, were they gonna take her, and like I don't know.
Which, I mean, now your little gambit, you've created now this moment of, it's like Men in Black. I mean, it's like now Renslayer has seen these people like, what are you guys doing in my office? Like, does this one have to be pruned now? Like, it's like, oh, thank you. You really helped me convince my coworkers that we're variants. Oh, and by the way, here's this here's this cloudy thing. I don't know. But which makes you wonder what happens to this TVA now.
Yeah, which we got season 2 confirmed in the post credit scene,
Right.
which was just literally a stamp being saying Loki season 2 will come soon. So
Yeah.
I imagine, or at the very least, I hope that our Mobius is going to be in season 2, and maybe it'll be like, plot line A is what's going on with Loki, plot line B, maybe what's going on with the TVA we're familiar with, and maybe a Sylvie thread as well. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess we're getting a Mobius either way, but we're still Owen Wilson's going to be in it, even if he's this new one from this new TVA. But I hope we get our version back,
Yeah,
and I
for
hope he
sure.
gets that jet ski ride. He deserves it.
When the series ends, we'll get it. So, all right. Anything else?
Um, yeah, there. So one thing about Miss Minutes, which we kind of spoke on why she made them that offer, but also like, what is her place in this? We didn't get any explanation on her. She just seemingly is Immortus's right hand gal. Um, but this is probably pretty mundane, but one thing that stood out to me is that, and I forget what the exact line of dialogue was, but it's when she shows up in front of Renslayer at the beginning and gives her the information or whatever. He's like, "Sorry, I was dealing with something," which meant that she can only be in one place at one time. And
Yeah,
presumably, I had just figured that she kind of like, could be talking to this member of the TVA and also be over
sure.
here talking to somebody else. So
Sure.
it was just interesting to me that she is like a singular entity.
Right.
Um,
I think we're gonna see that it's like Nathaniel Richards, like Jarvis, basically.
hmm,
And basically, whether it's in that form or not, but I'd be curious to see if it turns into Miss Minutes at some point, because definitely there's some history there. So I don't
yeah,
know.
that would be interesting. Hmm. I wonder if clearly, I don't know if affection's the right word because maybe it's just a cold AI. But if Miss Minutes does like have an affection, a connection to Immortus, maybe this is probably a stretch, but maybe that offer she made to them when they first entered the castle was to like get them to just leave because she didn't even want the possibility of like him dying.
So maybe it wasn't necessarily even directly coming from him, but
Right.
just like her kind of. It makes sense. I like that.
There's really no evidence for that, but it just came to me right now. So I was like, maybe that's what it is, but
Yeah.
who knows?
It's probably not true, but here's what we think.
But yeah,
Okay.
I think I'm gonna have a lot more to say like a week from now when this is digested. But for the most part, I think
Mm.
we galaxy brained as hard as we could. Oh, one more thing, Galaxy made me think of it. The intro, which I wanted to talk about a little bit. One, I just thought that was awesome, getting all those quotes, and the one thing that stood out to me, there was in one of the like zoom outs, there's a spaceship. And I just feel like it's one of those things that like it wouldn't be nothing. But I couldn't it didn't
Like the debris.
yeah, but it's like an actual spaceship that like flies in front of the screen and
Yeah.
it's nothing that I recognize, and from a quick search I didn't see anyone that had identified it. And so I don't know, it just torqued something in my brain that was like this I feel like this is something or an Easter egg or a shout out or something. But the only thing I could come up with, since I couldn't find anything about it, was that maybe it's the Void spacecraft that they alluded to like when
Oh
they
my
were
gosh.
stalling. Like maybe it actually
Yeah.
was a thing and maybe Rinslayer's in there, you know? I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah, no, I have no idea. That's interesting. We'll have to see if we get any justice to that theory or
Yeah,
not.
so I had to get that in case, 3 years from now it's true. I can, take my
and if
flowers.
and if it's not, we'll just bury this
Yeah,
moment
yeah, for sure.
in
We'll
the
never speak of
podcast.
it again.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fun episode, and for those of you who have been with us on the journey, I think it's fair to say we'll still do one more episode, like a post-season wrap up. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I don't hate that.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like we have to talk about like our high points and things like that we like really liked.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do it in like a couple weeks, like maybe before What If starts or something.
Yeah. But for those of you who have joined us on the journey, thanks so much. It's been fun hashing out this show on a weekly basis. And yeah, check out our other stuff. We got Exandria Unlimited. We got episode 4 coming soon because we're watching it tonight.
Yep.
And more Marvel content. We'll see what other stuff comes at the top as well.
Yep. And there's just one more thing to do. Thumbnail.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I was trying to think of like something fun that's like Loki themed, but I got nothing off the top of my head. You got any ideas?
I had a weird idea. I was like,
let's hear it.
I was like, what's like the big moment? I go, Loki and Sylvie kissing. And I was like, oh, wait. That might be weird for us to try to figure out.
Good idea.
So what else? What else could we do? It's got to be something to do with like Kang, or part of me, I'm kind of like it's Kang or something like that is what I was thinking.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Just like a shocked,
shocked
face.
Yeah, shocked face for sure.
Plus, that just has a very clickbaity thumbnail, so it's really working on multiple levels.
We got it.
All right, you ready?
All right, cool. Yeah.
I think we got it.
I think our thumbnail game is pretty good because my wife, I was looking at her YouTube, and the one from our latest Exandria one where you're holding up your little dino.
I'm proud of that.
She was like, what is that? And I was like, that's Exandria. So
I'm proud of that one. That's my favorite one so far, I think.
Well, for our listeners, man, thanks so much for being part of the journey. Don't forget you check out our Twitter at Pxlists. That's Pxlists. And definitely continue to follow the YouTube. And if you watch a really great show, I mean like a really great show, and you think we'd enjoy it, definitely throw it our way. Maybe we'll check it out for some new content. Thanks for tuning in. I guess we'll check you later.
All righty. Peace, everybody.